Hello and welcome once again to the Awaken Life channel with me, Mark Jansen, the Love Philosopher. Today we're going to explore what is a spiritual awakening and how can I have one? When we look at the world, what do we see? We notice problems, problems, problems. On the international stage, there are more than 60 armed conflicts currently going on in the world. We see huge inequality. According to Oxfam, 50,000 people die each day through lack of clean water, nutritious food, and simple medicine. Yet in the West, we have so much food that so many people are overweight or obese. We see climate change, and now currently in Europe there are forest fires everywhere because of the heat. On an individual level, people are stressed out about relationships. People are stressed out about their career. They're stressed out about emotional and personal problems. And so, according to one study, anxiety, stress, and depression have risen over 300% in the last 20 years. But there is a solution to all of these problems, because all of these problems have the same cause. The cause to all problems in the world, as well as within our lives, is the fact that most people are spiritually dead, or they are spiritually in a coma, secondly, or thirdly, they are spiritually asleep. And so, the solution to the problems we see in our own life, as well as in the world at large, is spiritual awakening. So today we're going to look at what is a spiritual awakening, why is it important, and how to have one. We can say, simply speaking, a spiritual awakening is when we become aware of the fact that not only are we spiritual beings, but we are aware of the fact that we can have a relationship with our spirit or our higher self. And in doing so, we are aware of the fact that we are not just physical beings. We are far more. In fact, we're more powerful than we ever imagined. We've been sold a lie. As I've said previously, that lie is the lie of materialism, that we're physical beings, there is no higher purpose, there is no God, there is no higher dimension to life. We're just physical beings here for a brief period in history. That is a lie. We're spiritual beings and we're here for a clear and specific of the infinite spirit. So it has wisdom, it has knowledge, and it has understanding to help us as we go through life. So one benefit, when we awaken spiritually, we find we have guidance. And when we have guidance, we don't make mistakes. Now, I've said before, mistakes and accidents, they don't really exist. But they do exist on some level, because when we have an accident or a mistake or an accident, it's actually a wake-up call from the higher self. It's trying to say, hey, wake up. We're trying to get through to you. That's all an accident or a mistake really is. And so, as we awaken spiritually, we not only don't have accidents in our lives, but we receive the guidance from the higher self. So in other words, we can have access to infinite wisdom. A second benefit for awakening spiritually is that as we awaken spiritually, you could say we are giving life to the soul. And the soul is essentially the divine spark. The divine spark is an aspect of the divine or God, and that is pure love. And so when we connect with that, when we live with God, we feel the indwelling of joy, we feel bliss, we feel harmony within our lives. And that's a sign that we have awoken spiritually when we feel joy for no reason. That joy is the awakening of the soul. That joy is the connection with Source. That joy is infinite love that resides within us and is our true identity. So second benefit of awakening spiritually, we feel the indwelling joy of our connection with God. And a third benefit for when we awaken spiritually is we develop spiritual strength. Now, in life, we all go through difficulties and hard times. Most people, when they go through difficulty and hard times, they get upset, they get frustrated, they get sad, they get mad, they get anxious, and they get depressed. No wonder mental health problems are on the increase, because when bad things happen, people don't know how to cope. But if we have a spiritual awakening, when bad things happen, when difficulties happen, when problems happen, because we're not judging them from an external perspective, but we're looking at them from the holistic, more spiritual perspective, we know there is a reason why things happen. So when we spiritually awaken, we have a strength, a confidence that is inbuilt within us that can help us overcome the most difficult experiences. That's a few reasons why spiritual awakening is so important. So then the next question is, how can we have a spiritual awakening? Well, there are many ways. A few of them are, firstly, oftentimes when difficult things happen in our life, as I've just explained, many people fall apart and they get upset. But if we can use that difficult situation as a catalyst, it can help us have a spiritual awakening. For example, I have a few friends who told me they've been dumped by their partner and they fell into a depression, but it caused them to reevaluate their lives. And as they reevaluated their lives, they realized something more was missing, and it led them to a spiritual awakening, and it led them to developing their spiritual life. And so sometimes when bad things happen, these bad things could be the fact that our spirit, the higher self, is trying to awaken us. And so that's one way that people have a spiritual awakening, through going through a difficulty. It could be being dumped, it could be losing of a job, it could be a negative medical diagnosis. Anything negative that's life-changing is an opportunity for a spiritual awakening. A second way that people can have a spiritual awakening is if they have a spiritual encounter. Now, in history, there have been many people who have had spiritual encounters. One of the most famous ones was a person called Saul of Tarsus. He was a Pharisee who was very passionate about the law, and he attacked early Christians. But one day he had a vision where he saw Jesus, and that vision was so powerful and life-changing, it turned his life around, and he went from persecuting Christians to being the most dedicated Christian, and he ended up writing more than half of the New Testament. Another person who's a favorite of mine is Francis of Assisi. He was a rich playboy and a womanizer, but when he had one encounter with God, it turned his life around drastically, 180 degrees. He became a beggar and he gave away all his wealth because he wanted to serve God. I've mentioned before, and I'm going to mention in more detail, my own spiritual encounter at 19. When I encountered God, it was so profound and life-changing that I quit my job, I quit my boxing career, and I became a missionary and gave my life in service of God. Because when we encounter the spiritual, when we encounter the divine, it's life-changing. So that's the second way that we can have a spiritual awakening, through a spiritual encounter with God or with Jesus or with our spirit guides. A third way is through what's known as near-death experience, an NDE. So some people, they've had an accident and they may have been on the operating theatre in the hospital and their heart stopped for a few minutes and they crossed over to the other side and they effectively died. And they say that they've met dead loved ones, relatives, friends, or they've met a religious figure. And what's interesting about near-death experiences is that people of all faiths, and especially people of no faiths, have had them, and they all share similar experiences. They were greeted by higher beings. They were in a realm where they were just embraced by love. And the people who have had these near-death experiences, when they come back, their lives are irrevocably changed and they are living a spiritual path. There are actually many different ways of having a spiritual awakening. Just by reading or listening to something spiritual is enough to help somebody have a spiritual awakening. Watching these videos, you can have a spiritual awakening. It basically means that point where we become aware of our spirit, then we feed our spirit and help it to grow, which is the reason we are here at this time on the planet. So, spiritual awakening is, for so many of us, why we are having so many difficulties in life, because we are either spiritually dead, we're either spiritually in a coma, or we are either spiritually asleep. Because of that, we live an unconscious life. We are on autopilot and we're not consciously aware of the things that we do. It has been said 80% of all the things we do are out of habit. So we're not thinking of them, we're not doing them consciously, we're doing them unconsciously. And it's this unconscious living that leads to all our suffering, all our misery, all our problems. What we need is to awaken spiritually. There are many ways that we can awaken spiritually. I've mentioned a few, but there are limitless ways of awakening spiritually. It doesn't matter how you awaken, but the main thing is that you awaken. Before I close, I'm going to just offer a quote that will help us to focus on awakening spiritually. That quote is, "Blessings come disguised as difficulties, but most people never find them because they've been brainwashed to think that difficulties are bad, rather than a precious opportunity to awaken and grow." So, my friends, in closing, there are so many problems all around us. These problems exist because most of us are spiritually dead, asleep, or just in a coma. We can awaken spiritually. That's why we're here. Often, the catalyst to help us awaken are difficulties. So rather than getting upset, rather than getting angry, rather than being anxious or panic, those difficulties are an opportunity for us to awaken. So let's take that opportunity, let's awaken, and as we awaken, let's live our best life now, because that, my friends, is the awakened life. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.